any guesters? Right. Okay, I'm going on Discord. It's time to talk about some balance memes, I think, in my mind, guys. It's time for balance meme talk here. Right, Nike, let's go. It's time. The main thing is what I wanted to discuss is that something I've really noticed historically in Guild Wars 2 is that the way players typically perceive balance is very heavily influenced by play rates. To the point where if something doesn't see play, everyone will assume it's bad, then nobody plays it, then people go, oh, nobody plays this build, that means it's bad, so the play rate goes down even more, and you have this vicious cycle of people thinking that builds are completely horrible and unplayable. And this, I think this is a bit of a problem. I think we need to break people out of this mindset, because if we don't, I think that there will always be these bad perceptions and concerns about balance that are very difficult to address without making a build like crazy OP. I think a really good example of this was actually Tempest, right? And another reason why I wanted to bring this up actually is because I made a tier list video, and in that tier list video, Ellies were like, yeah, Tempest unplayable, has been unplayable for years, right? And there were a lot of Elementals players who were even saying that Catalyst is really bad now, even though it has a very solid DPS option. It's way more durable than it used to be because of the hammer buffs. It has a heal build, right? Heal Tempest is it's a bit meh. I'm not gonna lie, not the best build in the universe, but even stuff like Weaver is not like unplayable by any stretch of the imagination. And I really wanted to just say, listen, gamers, if you want to play Weaver, don't let anyone stand in your way, okay? You're not a detriment to the team. Your skill as a player is going to be more impactful than your build not necessarily being optimal. This actually goes for most things too, funnily enough. Like, even if you really want to play Spellbreaker, honestly, is it like the best idea in the universe? Probably not. But is it going to completely grief your group and they can't win? No, it's not. Same thing with stuff like Vindicator, right? Like, Vindicator is not the best build in the universe and could definitely use a little bit of love. But is it going to grief your group? No, of course not. And I really want to break people out of this mentality because I think it's causing the metagame to be artificially strict, right? Like, it's very self-imposed balance that doesn't necessarily reflect reality. And in a way, has caused a lot of issues within the community. People get frustrated about not being able to play the build they want, but it's more of an in-game culture thing rather than an actual, this build is bad thing, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a big issue is there's inertia, like build inertia or comp inertia, where even if a better way to do something comes out, unless the old way is invalidated, then the new way will never become, or will take a very long time to become the popular way to do something.
I think that's kind of compounded by the fact that it can be quite, it can be a bit of an investment to re-gear as well, because you're going to have to change your setup significantly, particularly if you're going to a new profession, and you're going to have to learn something new as well. And learning something new it's weird, because, it's funny. I think you made this statement actually a long time ago, and it really, really rings true now. When you first play a new build, it's going to feel bad, right? It's going to feel weak. Why? Because you've got no idea what you're doing, right? You can't play it very well. So, of course, it's going to feel weak. You're going to feel like you have no damage, right? Or, you're not surviving very well, or anything like that. Like, anything new isn't going to feel as good as what you've been playing for years because you just don't have that muscle memory. You don't have the familiarity built in. And that, again, adds to this inertia, like you say, right, where people will stick to the old stuff, even if the other things are basically about the same or equally as valid and equally as powerful, but it just doesn't really shift. And because it doesn't shift, people assume that it's bad, right? Like, that's when they take that leap to, oh, yeah, no one's playing it, it must be complete trash.
Yeah. And like with the Bladesworn thing that we were talking about earlier, it's sort of like a lot of people, they come up with like very interesting like rationalizations for why they don't want to play Bladesworn. but I think in a lot of cases it boils down to Bladesworn isn't better strictly everywhere or even most places. So the time that I have to invest to learn it isn't worth it to me.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to play Berserker everywhere because I already know how to play it, and I don't want to. And if Bladesworn was better literally everywhere, they would take the time to learn it.
Yeah,
but because it's not, they just don't feel it's a good investment to learn a class to play on 3 bosses or 2 bosses.
Which is, I mean, that's understandable, right? You know.
Yeah, if you're like a more casual player, that's totally understandable. But if it's your main class, I don't think that that's acceptable.
Yeah. I think the other thing that kind of almost follows on from this is something else that I wanted to talk about is another really big problem with the metagame. I don't know what exactly this stems from, and maybe I'm just kind of barking up the wrong tree here, but I think the problem with Guild Wars 2 group comps, and a big problem that stops the meta from being as diverse as perhaps it should be, looking at the way things are balanced, is actually where the main barriers are, right? You know, I think, you know, people always mean, oh, you know, raids are easy, right? Oh, you know, just get in there and play. But I think the actual obstacle that a lot of players encounter is actually just making a group, right? Like, and this causes players to always gravitate to the builds that make group making as easy as possible. And ArenaNet's trying to address this by making classes very flexible, right? So like everything has a buffer build, everything has a healing build, everything can do quickness, everything can do alacrity in some way, at least. But I do still think that this is really, really a big problem. If a build is a little bit harder to fit into a group composition, like maybe not quite as versatile, I think it gets shunned by the community quite a lot, right? And that's, you know, kind of the same thing with Bladesworn, right? Because it's like, oh, well, you know, I can't play this build on every single boss, or rather, you know, it will, you know, I'd be better off playing Berserker on average a lot of the time. It kind of further incentivizes people to move away from stuff here. But I think you're not going to get rid of that. Like, the fact that different builds perform differently in other locations isn't a... that's not something that's really solvable. I think what needs to change is players need to have an easier time building groups, whether that's they're more confident in figuring out how like all the classes fit together, if that's adding more options so that, you know, builds don't fulfill the same role, so it's a bit, you can be a bit more flexible by having a different build in your arsenal. I think that's something that Bladesworn suffers from, right? Is that it's all warrior specs are DPS. There's no like, oh, you know, I can learn Bladesworn because this will allow me to get into groups easier because it does quickness, right? Or, oh, I can, you know, if I play my Thief, if I play Spectre, well, now it's really easy to get into groups because everyone wants alacrity and some kind of like hybrid damage dealer support thing. So now it's way easier for me to get into groups. And I think that elite specializations that don't have that ability tend to suffer a little bit more in the meta than perhaps you would expect in some of these situations. So I think that the real key to making the meta more cozy and more relaxed is actually figuring out ways to make group building as easy as possible, right? Like that barrier is, I think, a huge part of what causes players to play the exact same thing all over the place. What do you think about that?
Yeah, for sure. And luckily I think we are definitely moving a bit away from that, or a bit more towards the goal. I mean, just as far as like strikes go, like pretty much no one cares what you play as long as you make the boons that you said you could make. Mm-hmm. And that's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, like the confidence of a commander to tag up, I mean, that's hard to give to people. Commander has to like know at least enough to know what the boons are that are needed and what to ask for.
Yeah.
But I mean, by the time you have a commander tag and you want to raid, you should know that. That would be strange to like have a commander tag, be into raiding enough to like make your own group, but not know what boons are what. Like that would be very strange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, though, a lot of players don't feel confident to kind of put those puzzle pieces together. There's this very solid thing of what people know, and they'll just play by that, right? Like, what people know is what they know works. And anything outside of that, I think there is a bit of a lack of confidence in putting it all together. That's why we need the Hardstuck.gg team comp builder. Oh yeah, they're going to mess around with it and learn all they want. Maybe that won't help though. I don't know. Who knows? I guess it just does come down to just kind of like spreading the word, I guess, as much as possible, so people are aware of this stuff a little bit more, right? If people make a video about something, it actually does influence it, right? Like I know that, like when I made I think my most infamous one was actually like the Minstrel Chrono video. When I made the Minstrel Chrono video, everyone played Minstrel Chrono. It was actually really funny. A little bit with Heal Scourge as well. Like when I made the Heal Scourge video, everyone started spamming Heal Scourge a fair bit. So maybe I just got to get on that, right? We've got to stop slacking and try to communicate with people as much as possible in the raid scene, because ultimately a lot of it is word of mouth, right? Like I think a lot of people, they'll see someone on the subreddit say, oh yeah, this build is complete trash, it's completely unplayable, and they'll go, oh shit, they must be telling the truth, right? Like, oh no, maybe it is unplayable, right? Maybe my build does suck. And I think that I don't really know how to deal with that, because this is just like a very common problem, not just, not even just on the internet or in games. There's a lot of misinformation in Guild Wars 2. There is a huge amount of misinformation about what's good, why it's good, how it's good, where it's good. Almost everything about the game, I think, is not very well understood by a lot of people, particularly a lot of people who maybe say stuff about it sometimes, right? And that ends up kind of spiraling out of control, right? When like comments get upvoted, all the Ellie mains upvote for buffs, right?
Yeah. It's interesting looking at like the wingman stats for like Weaver.
Yep.
Like you can totally see where they added Weaver to the game, and it was like at POF release it was roughly equal to Tempest in terms of like Weaver might have been like Weaver was 7% of the meta, Tempest was 5% of the meta. And then you just see Weaver getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it peaks at 17%. And then it was doing like 46k damage at that point.
Pretty good build.
And then it gets nerfed and it just steadily declines into irrelevance from there. But yeah, but the fact is like its growth wasn't like necessarily that fast. It took a long time for people to stop using Dragon Hunter. Like you can see, its growth came at the expense of Dragon Hunter, and its decline came like to the benefit of Dragon Hunter and the benefit of Holosmith. So it's just interesting how, and these things don't really happen necessarily overnight. Like there is inertia, in what people pick to play.
I think there's definitely one thing that I'd really want to emphasize about the game is that the game is very skill dependent. So you don't have to play the best builds to clear content in Guild Wars 2. You don't, right? The content simply isn't tuned that aggressively. Obviously, it helps, right? If you play builds that aren't quite as strong, you're essentially increasing the difficulty of content. So obviously, like playing the best build will, potentially give you the best win rate, assuming you play it correctly, obviously, or play it decently well. But I think that a lot of players have a bit of a false apprehension that if I don't play the meta builds, like the best in slot build, this content can't be done. Whereas in reality, the difference between playing a meta build and a build that's maybe not quite up to snuff, right, is far less than the skill differential from a player who's not playing a build very well and a player who's playing a build really well. So realistically, the biggest difference you can make in your own performance in Guild Wars 2 isn't entirely by changing your build. It's just going to be by playing better, right? By doing the mechanics better, by doing your rotation better, by applying your boons better. Like that's going to be the deciding factor in your performance, rather than playing like the uber optimal build. The game is surprisingly balanced right now. This is something that you pointed out in a video as well. The golden age of Guild Wars 2, and that is true. Like I think that a lot of the builds are, in PvE at least, and honestly even in PvP. PvP is surprisingly balanced actually, but they're shockingly close together, actually. Like, they're shockingly interchangeable. And I think we have seen that particularly in Strike LFGs. I think people aren't very picky there. As long as you give a lack and you say, oh, I'm gonna lack, they don't really care what you're playing, right? Like, that's not, you know, people don't really give a shit that much. And maybe in other groups as well, you know. In fact, I'm gonna double down on this. I think a lot of this is actually a bit of a perception thing, because I tested this the other day actually, and I looked on the like the raid LFG, and people are actually not asking for specific professions. They're actually asking for roles, right? Like the one thing that you will see asked for is stuff like heal firebrand, right? And druid sometimes, if you need it for like a specific mechanic sometimes, because druid is like, it's very good at specific things. As you can see here, there's a heal firebrand and a druid being asked for, but almost everything is generic, right? Alacrity, quickness, tank, right? Quickness DPS, banner slave, right? So I mean, well, because that is a warrior, I suppose, but you know, in general, it's pretty chill. You can see here actually like quickness DPS, alac DPS, right? Quickness heal, right? It's actually, all of it is very, very just anything you want, really. But I think it's definitely it's a perception thing more than a reality thing. And yeah, sure, some groups will ask for specific things, like, you know, people love their quickness max, right? And fractals in particular, I think, are a bit more strict because of the, you know, the way the balance is in that game mode. But in general, for like the 10-player content, it's a lot more relaxed than people actually think it is. And it kind of makes me sad, because I think a lot of people get worried and a bit anxious about not being accepted in groups, where in reality, it's more of the fact that that's kind of just the way it's perceived rather than the way it actually is. Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally happy with things, how they are right now. I mean, obviously, the summer patch has potential to make things even better. So we'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, overall, like, I think, like, honestly, Catalyst, like, looking at the stats on Wingman, Catalyst isn't even the most underplayed spec compared to its power level. That would be Willbender. Condi Willbender damage is so OP, and it's very easy to play. And it's, what, 1.5% of the meta. Like, Catalyst is 2.29% of the meta. Arguably, Willbender should be even higher because it's easier to play, and it's better damage.
Yeah,
it's pretty busted.
That is a really interesting one, because in general, a lot of people play Guardian, right? Like, Guardian's a very popular class. I'm really surprised to see that, because it does have some good numbers on it. I think maybe it's because it's more of a pure DPS spec. Obviously, you can take just, you know, your usual Guardian utilities on it, but I think it does lack a little bit in kind of, I guess, the group support. And I guess people are really attached to Firebrand, right? So I think Firebrand might be causing problems there, because if you look at the play rate on Wingman, what you'll see is that Firebrand is not budged like an inch, right, with the release of EOD, right? It is very much still there. Oh, the horror. The play rate's gone down by 2%, Nike. Goodness me. Oh no. So I think maybe it's because a lot of the Guardians are just kind of happy playing Firebrand instead. Because that's one thing that I do notice a lot, actually, is that typically one elite spec will typically dominate pretty hard, right? And like, everyone will play like the one that's perceived to be the best. The only case where this isn't true is Mesmer, funnily enough. Whereas you can see it's like very even here. Like, there's like a good amount of Chronos, a good amount of Mirages, and a good amount of Virtuosos as well. But everything else, it's like Mech 8 Hollow, dude. It feels so bad. Look at this. Like oh no! Like, Hollow was on 4%. It got devoured by the Mech, down to 2.3%. You hate to see that. Very unfortunate.
Well, I think the thing with Firebrand is the nerf to the Aegis on the heal skill only punished Firebrands who pressed their heal skill to give Aegis. So a lot of pugs were totally unaffected. They made it through unscathed.
Oh no, I'm not sure where we were going with this. Kind of wandered off topic a little bit there, but yeah, the key thing that I wanted to kind of get across is that I think we need to find a way to communicate to players that the meta isn't as strict as they think it is, and that build variety is actually pretty okay. There's a lot of builds that are pretty close together. You don't have to play like the best build in the universe, and that skill is going to be the defining part of how effective you are, rather than like how good your build or how optimal your build is. Now, to be clear, guys, I wish I still had my artwork. Oh wait, I do have my artwork from earlier. Yes. Here's the very, very important thing, guys. Do not take this. Do not take this statement. I'm relying on all of you to be responsible. With great knowledge, guys, and great power comes great responsibility, okay? Look, Vindicator is not as good as Dragon Hunter, okay? But these builds, they both have the purple tick of approval. These are both builds that work out well. And Vindicator is considered to be quite bad. And it's not the best thing in the universe, but it's also not actually that bad. But here's the problem, okay? Both of these builds actually do something, right? And this is the rule for everyone. If your build does something, it's probably good enough. Does it heal? Does it give boons? Does it do damage? Does it, give alacrity? I don't know. Maybe it does a mechanic really well, for example. Can it solo things? I don't know. You tell me. If it can do that, it's probably good enough to clear content in the game. However, if you have a build that makes no sense and doesn't do anything, then it's not good enough. For example, guys, Carrion Longbow Ranger, not good. Don't run this. It's not going to work out very well. Longbow, power weapon, carrion gear, combi weapon. No synergy there. This build will not contribute to the game, to the group in any meaningful way. Vindicator, on the other hand, is it the optimal DPS build? No. But does it contribute the damage roll? Absolutely. And that is the defining factor. And I think players tend to overestimate how bad a build has to be before it's like completely non-viable, right? Like I put this orange line here to kind of indicate like how bad something would have to be. But to be honest, look, let me tell you something. The build that I actually rated the worst in my tier list is Untamed. And even Untamed, honestly, it's not even close to the level of badness that would be required for it to be not viable. Even something like Untamed, it's like the most meh build in the entire game, right? We'll just put like a little sad face here for Untamed, okay? Even this build, it's not that bad, right? Now, the problem is, if you run like 6 Untames, is that going to give you a problem? But if you have like 1, that's not really a big deal. If you can't carry someone who's living the Untamed dream, then honestly, your group needs to step up and let them live out their fantasy of being an Untamed Ranger and just blasting away like crazy. Hell yeah, that's what we like to see. And the other big thing on this graph as well, I'll just restate this. Basically, the difference between DH and Vindicator is far less than the difference between an unskilled player or a skilled player, or maybe not even a skilled player, simply a player who's comfortable on a build versus not comfortable on a build. Because you got to bear in mind, right? If you go, oh, I'm going to be way better now because I play Dragon Hunter. Well, if you've only played Vindicator, well, you might not be that good, right? You know, you might have to relearn the build, and maybe you just don't like it, right? And that makes it harder to learn. So yeah, bear that in mind, guys. Skill, very important. Build, less important. Still is important, particularly the real support builds in general are a little bit more skewed here. We're mostly talking about DPS builds not being that relevant. Even there, you have like extreme examples like Scourge outperforming basically everything in terms of being OP for carrying people. But in general, even the support builds are pretty good now. I take it back, because you have like Heal Firebrand, you have Heal Mech, you still have Druid going about the place, you have Spectre in the mix now as well. Okay, it's good. And even stuff like Tempest, right? Even Tempest isn't that bad, right? Like, Tempest got hit pretty hard, but the build is definitely perfectly playable. You just need to take, like, 2 DPS options that give alacrity and quickness, and then you're good to go. It will actually perform really well if you do that, by the way, because it still heals a lot more. If you actually compare, like, the amount of healing that Tempest can deliver compared to, say, a Mechanist, Tempest comes out really nicely there, actually. It's, like, very favorable because of, like, how much sustained healing the Tempest can bring compared to a lot of the other contemporary options, like Firebrand and Mechanist. There you go. Do you think there's a way that ArenaNet could communicate what builds do in the game to other players?
I think they are moving in that direction.
What do you think they could do?
Severs has said that ArenaNet themselves view the roles as heal, DPS, quickness, and alacrity. So there's like 4 roles. And maybe, I guess, tank. That he didn't mention tank, but that could be a role, right? Mm-hmm. In theory, you could have a character that did nothing but tank, just like pure selfish healing and sustain and high toughness. But obviously, there's ways to combine those with role compression. That's very desirable. But it wouldn't be hard to label those as, like, actually officialize those as roles in the game. It might take a few balance patches, but in theory, you could get to the point with those where if ANet just commits and says these are the roles in Guild Wars 2 PvE, then you're close to being able to have like a queuing system. I don't know that would be a huge success, but it could be something that you could at least think about implementing.
It would have to rely on trust. If you
Well,
sign up
it
as
would
a
have to
lag,
rely
you
on
have
the
to give a lag.
Yeah. Well, they could also like check your build, but I mean that's perilous. But the big problem would be if I join, like, and someone on Reddit had this idea. They were like, "Oh, when I play Final Fantasy, I can just press one button and it queues me into a group." And I'm like, "Yeah, what happens when that group wipes hilariously in the first 5 seconds of a fight because it's clear that half the group has no clue what they're doing?" And they go, "They just try again." And I go, "I don't believe that. I know human nature, and human nature would be for the 5 good players to go, yeah, the 5 bad players in this group are omega bad, and I'm out of here." So that's the problem you're going to run into with any sort of like dungeon queue thing.
Yeah, I think it has to be appropriately difficult, right? Like, it just has to be a little bit easier if you're going to have a queue system. I think the problem with the role thing is that certain builds just don't really fit together very well. So, for example, if you have, let's say you do like, you have a quickness scrapper and alacrity spectre. Well, got some bad news for you. Like, your group has like no boons, right, at that point. I mean, technically speaking, they both fit those roles, right? But the problem is that it doesn't really work out quite so well. So I think it's really hard to make like a proper role system in the game because certain combos just don't really work out super well. But I don't know. Maybe does there need to be like what if you could view the abilities of every class in the game without relogging to it or creating a new character? Like there's like a mega dictionary of abilities.
I mean, that would be cool. What would you be looking for?
Well, it's just like, this is the problem that I'm looking to solve. I think that a lot of players just don't feel comfortable in the squad building process because they don't know how all the classes fit together. I hear this a lot. This gets echoed a lot in Twitch chat and my YouTube comments as well, is that they'll go, "I don't know how to fit everything together." You know, if I was going to tag up, I wouldn't feel confident on how things fit together. And I don't really know how to learn, right? I don't know how that you would get this knowledge. So the problem I'm looking to solve is like, what would we do to give these players that knowledge? How do we give them the knowledge of what the classes do?
Well, the most easy baseline thing you can do is just let them know what roles there are: quickness, alacrity, healing, and DPS.
Okay.
And let them just ask for those roles.
Yep.
And trust the community to join on the correct builds. Like, and I would say that 90% of the time that would work out because you're most likely going to get a quickness firebrand to join as quickness, and you're most likely going to get a heal mech or a renegade to join for a lack. And that'll work out. And actually, with pugs, you're most likely going to get a heal brand. You know, you're going to get like heal brand, heal mech to join, and that would work out for pretty much every group.
Okay. Then that's a good point. Then that is a good thing. Yeah. If people knew that you just need to search for those things, then most of the time you're going to get a good result with that. I would say anyway. Most of the time, I think it will work out.
Yeah, the problem with like this class can do this is like you said, like you can.
It's too much.
You can go, oh, I think, well, this class can make alacrity, but is it the class that you want making alacrity? Maybe not. So like you might be too in the weeds with that almost. Like it's still like now that you know that Spectre can make alacrity, that doesn't really get you any closer to making a good group. But what's more important is that you know to ask for alacrity in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
That's 90%.
You know the individual pieces. The individual pieces need to be expressed correctly. Do you think they could do that do you think they could construct something like in the game? Because I think with all this stuff is that, we can make websites stuff, we can make videos and blah, blah, blah. And that's all well and good, right? That's good. It's good. But is that something they could somehow add? Like, there should be like a recommended boon list that you should have in your subgroup or something like that?
So, when you make a character at the character creation screen and you hover over each profession and it tells you like, warrior's a weapon master that can wield 8 different weapons, like, why not also have the warrior's elite specs mentioned there, where it describes each elite spec and what each elite spec does.
Ooh.
That way, when you pick Necro, you go, Necro is a master of death, blah, blah, blah. And Necro's elite specializations are the Reaper, which is a high damage melee bruiser build, like and so on. And then like it prepares the player to know that like Firebrand is a support buffer, an offensive support or offensive a huge support buffer, you know, like, and it at least primes you to know that that's the class you're picking.
So it kind of mention stuff like, you know, you can I don't know, how would you describe quickness in a way that isn't stupid, actually?
Just, I mean, you can make it really, it depends how roleplay you want to get with it. Like, you can be like, Firebrand has several powerful boons that increase, you know, the action speed of your team. Or you just say it has several powerful offensive and defensive boons that complement any group or something like that.
Can hasten your allies, full RP.
Yeah.
Increase the haste. That's good. It's direct carryover from WoW, right?
Yeah. How will they describe Untamed?
And that's all I've got to say about that, really. Meta's pretty good. We need to help players understand things. I'm just trying to sum up here to make sure I've covered everything I want to say. Because do you know what happens when I try and do these stream segments, Nike? I do the stream segment, and then I go, wait a minute, I didn't say something, and it's ruined. And I go, oh no, I've completely clowned myself here. So I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen. Not today, my friends. Not today. Today is the day I remember all the things I want to put in the video. But I think that actually is about it. So maybe it actually isn't today. Not bad.